I am very excited to welcome, and Julie, maybe you can spotlight us if you don't mind, if you have a second. I'm really excited to bring up Kirsten Moore, who is an advocate of almost 40 years. She has experienced moving policy change on hot button issues like abortion and gun violence prevention. Under her leadership, the Reproductive Health Technologies Project was at the forefront of a 10-year effort to bring Plan B emergency contraception over the counter. And she went on to become the inaugural director of the National Partnerships for Everytown for Gun Safety Action Fund, and help move the issues of domestic violence and gun violence onto policymakers' agendas, including managing legislative campaigns in New Jersey and South Carolina that resulted in Republican governors signing legislation to keep guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. As a former domestic violence prosecutor, I appreciate that, Kirsten. After a brief stint with Pew Charitable Trust managing a portfolio to advance the public interest in a range of FDA policies, she started Emma, which is Expanding Medication Abortion Access Project in 2018, and she is here with Emma tonight. That project is focused on getting the FDA to change the way it regulates the distribution of medication abortion pills in the U.S., consistent with evidence, isn't that a good thing, and people's needs. Emma is now focused on ensuring that people in all 50 states have access to mifepristone or Miffy, which is the abortion pill, and which what we're here to talk about tonight. So, Kirsten, really excited to have you. Just go ahead and say hi if you
Yeah.
want. Anything else I missed about you?
No, that's a long bio, but it is 40 years. But it's really lovely to see all of the locations chiming in here. It is clearly a national community. That's great.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate your work because as a former Moms Demand Action volunteer, prevention is near and dear to my heart. And then obviously reproductive freedom. I am well past that concern, but I have daughters who are in their 20s. So I appreciate all you're doing. So let's just jump right into it. So a lot of people who are joining us tonight may not really even understand how the abortion pill works or what it does. So can you explain what mifepristone is and why it is such a critical part of reproductive health care in the US today?
Yeah, and I just saw there was already one question in the chat about the related. So mifepristone was approved by the FDA in the year 2000 as the first abortion pill in the United States. And mifepristone works to shut down the hormones that are necessary to continue a pregnancy. So a fertilized egg will detach from the uterine wall if a person takes mifepristone. The person also then has to take misoprostol, a second drug. Misoprostol causes cramping and bleeding so that pregnancy can now pass through the body. So medication abortion care involves both of those drugs, but mifepristone is specifically FDA approved with misoprostol on the label for abortion care. And I was working at the Population Council in 1996 when we got the rights to conduct the first clinical trial in the US. And I was so excited about this because I really thought it was going to change everything in the US because this was the time of abortion clinic bombings and violence, et cetera. And I just thought, oh my gosh, there's going to be a pill and people can go into their doctor's office and get the pill and this is going to radicalize. Well, it didn't quite turn out that way. And we'll get into stories about kind of how it got complicated. But basically, just know that Miffy has been around and been used by women in the United States for more than 25 years, safely and effectively, to end a pregnancy at under 10 weeks of pregnancy or less.
Okay, well, and I have a vague recollection of the that whole debate back in the 90s. So I wasn't a super activist back then, but I have a recollection of that. So Miffy, as
Yeah.
you just indicated, has been approved by the FDA for over 25 years. And study after study shown it to be safe and effective. So can you share some of the tactics, knowing that there's really not a reason to attack it on safety and efficacy? But can you share some of the techniques that the anti-abortion lawmakers and organizations are using to try and limit and ultimately ban it right now?
Yeah. So when mifepristone was first approved in 2000, This is going to be my Pew FDA wonk hat coming out. FDA approved it under Subpart H of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And that allowed FDA to put some restrictions on who could prescribe and dispense the medication. And, there's a lot of speculation. Did they do it out of real caution? They didn't have sufficient data in the US, or did they do it out of political caution? But they put those restrictions in place. And it meant that only healthcare professionals who signed up they certified to prescribe could write a prescription. Now, in order to certify to prescribe, all you have to do is check 3 boxes on a piece of paper that says, yes, I know how to date an early pregnancy, which of course we can all do because we know when we had our last menstrual period. Yes, I can detect an ectopic pregnancy, which actually is really tricky to do early in pregnancy. Even if you have a sonogram at 6, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, you're not going to see anything. So really the doctor's only going on medical history. What has your experience been? And then the third box you have to check says, yes, I know how to refer patients for treatment of complications or backup care if necessary. Again, part of every doctor's job. So not that complicated, but a lot of physicians who might otherwise have been interested in all of this were just kind of freaked out because that meant in their minds, this became a list of abortion providers. So that's why it took a long time to kind of grow the list of prescribers. But anyway, so that's how FDA initially restricted the distribution of MIFI. Only certified prescribers. At the time, it was only 7 weeks. It was only obstetricians, gynecologists who could certify, and there were a couple of other things. Okay, so go forward another, and those restrictions, by the way, all became what are called part of a system that FDA set up in the early aughts called REMS, Risk Evaluation Mitigation Strategy. So you might hear about REMS if you're reading news coverage or something like that. So the REMS were in place and were the same REMS up until 2016 when the drug maker for mifepristone, a company called Danco, said to FDA, hey, we want you to reevaluate the evidence and science because we've collected a lot of data about all of this and we want to update the label. And at that time, FDA updated the label to go from 7 weeks to 10 weeks of use to acknowledge that actually, if you were a licensed healthcare provider, you could meet all the criteria for prescribing this medication safely. And they did some other things about adverse event reporting because there weren't a lot of serious adverse events reported. So FDA said, actually, now you only have to report deaths. That's what we're gonna track. But they left the essential ingredients of the REMS in place so that, again, you have to go as a patient, you have to find a certified prescriber to get the pills. And you had to take the pills you had to be given the pills in the clinic. Sorry, that was the other thing that changed in 2016. Prior to 2016, FDA asked that you as the patient go to the clinic, get the pill, take mifepristone in the clinic. You could take misoprostol home with you, but you had to start the regimen in the clinic. In 2016, again, that changed, and FDA said it's okay for patients to take both mifepristone and misoprostol home and start the process, there once you're all set up. Okay, so that was 2016. And then there were some things in motion behind the scenes, but then the COVID pandemic hit. Right. And then FDA made some changes, some big picture agency changes where they issued some guidance that said, you know what, if you are taking a medication and the medication is labeled, says you have to come and take it in a clinic, we're going to allow healthcare providers to do telehealth visits with you and then send in a prescription to a local pharmacy or send in a prescription to a mail order pharmacy, which can deliver it to you. Right. Because that all made sense during the pandemic. They had an exception in that guidance. And they said, but this doesn't apply to pills that you have to take in person in the clinic. And of course, most of those pills are cancer treatment drugs. They're things that have to be carefully titrated, individually titrated. Mifepristone was the only pill that you had to pick up in a clinic, but you could take it home. Okay, so then the American Congress of Obstetricians and Gynecologists sued FDA and said, basically, you've got a double standard here. And they won in court. In the meantime, a lot of us in the professional research community, advocacy community, and again, service provider community collected a lot of data to show that what was happening in real time in terms of people being able to use telehealth visits and have the medication delivered to them was working. And in fact, the big outcome was people were getting their abortions even earlier, not at 10 weeks, but at 9 or 8 weeks, because they didn't have to wait for an appointment to go in person. So then FDA in 2021 said, okay, we see all that data, we see all that evidence, we're going to make this change permanent. We're going to remove the in-person distribution requirement on the pills, and we're going to allow pharmacies now to certify to dispense. Again, the pharmacy certification thing is a whole bunch of hooey and nothing and whatever. But now CVS and Walgreens are dispensing mifepristone prescriptions in upwards of 20 states. But and some patients prefer that. They want to, they get their prescription, they want to go right into the pharmacy and keep this whole process moving forward. Other people are using the telehealth services and just having the medication mailed to them. Or, maybe they saw their doctor in person, but they still want the medication delivered to them. They don't want to go in person into a pharmacy to pick up the pills. So it just gives people options. So that's how the pill is made available today. And we're going to get into some of the state stuff and the state regulations and how this clashes. But just briefly, the pill is available today, again, through telehealth visits. But what the opposition is intent on doing is putting mifepristone back under lock and key, is saying, okay, we have to reinstate that in-person distribution requirement. We have to require people to come into a clinic and take the pill in person, and do all of those kinds of things. So that's what we're pushing back on in this moment, is trying to make sure the opposition is going to try to come at us through legislation, through litigation, and through regulation. And so we want to make sure we are in what I call forward stance mode with our messages about this, to send a very clear message to President Trump. Don't go here. Don't restrict access to a safe, effective, early method for abortion care.
And I do want to get into some of the state tactics and the federal tactics, but like one of the things I do want to point out to people is, and I think I would love for you to expand on this, because I think people don't actually understand. They just hear mifepristone, it's the abortion pill. It's not just used for abortions.
Right.
So can you maybe just explain a little bit about that, or how people who are not even pregnant might utilize mifepristone?
Yeah. So again, remember I talked about the 2-pill regimen. It's mifepristone and misoprostol. So right now, mifepristone, is also approved for treating Cushing's disease, but that's it's named and differently, and doctors also, anyway, it's a whole different thing. But for mifepristone, it's primarily used to end an early pregnancy, but it's also used to help patients manage an early miscarriage. Because again, what you're doing is shutting down the hormones that are necessary to continue a pregnancy. And in miscarriage, you're never quite sure, exactly what went wrong. So the egg might no longer be growing, but it's still attached to the uterine wall. So you've got basically an incomplete miscarriage. So mifepristone can, again, help with that process. The second drug that we talked about, misoprostol, is widely used for all kinds of things, again, because it causes cramping and bleeding. So it was originally approved for treatment of gastric ulcers, but today is used a lot in the OB-GYN field to help dilate your cervix if you're about to have an IUD inserted. Again, if you're having complicated pregnancy and the doctor has to go in and do a procedure to bring that pregnancy out, or manage a later miscarriage, or actually, if my cousin uses, actually give birth to a healthy baby, because it'll open up the cervix and, then you get your baby. So, yes, when a doctor writes a prescription for Miffy or Mizo, Mizo in particular, nobody knows what the doctor doesn't write on there for abortion purposes only. They just say misoprostol. And so that's where we've run into some hiccups. Again, I saw this in the chat briefly in Louisiana in particular, which passed a law which scheduled mifepristone and misoprostol. So it makes it subject to heightened scrutiny. In theory, patients are still supposed to have access to both of those medications, but it allows, people who don't trust women to make some trouble.
Yep. And was hoping to bring on one of our members who had posted this in our Facebook group, and I think it's a great example if you guys want to share. She's 69 and had to have a procedure where she was prescribed that, and it was just to make the procedure better, like,
Yep,
softening of the tissue. And she went to her pharmacy to try to fill it, and they rejected it because I don't remember what state she lives in, but it was, part of an abortion ban state. And she's like, I am 69. I am not having a baby. So she had to go through some hoops and have her doctor's office call. And so I think that's important to share because I think so many people just don't recognize that this is, you know, there are women who are using this for a multitude of reasons, and it's not just for that purpose. But um,
that's right.
let's talk specifically then about the attacks at the federal level. So we know our Health and Human Services Director, RFK Jr., has just ordered a review. I say ours loosely, but has just ordered a review of Miffy. And it is based upon a recently released study, but that study was done by a right-wing think tank that happens to sit on the advisory board of Project 2025. So you can see the circular reasoning here. And this new report is not peer reviewed, it's basically junk science. So can you kind of go into like what is going on here?
Yeah, there's a lot going on here. So yeah, so that thing that was submitted, and it was written by an organization called EPIC, so Ethics and Public Policy Center. I call it epic piece of shit because I swear a lot. Um, Basically, they just took claims data, insurance claims data, and said to FDA, "Look, we've got 14,000 claims data here, and the big finding here is that a lot of women are having to go to the emergency room. So the adverse event report for mifepristone is much higher than has been reported in other." Peer-reviewed journals and FDA's own, again, ongoing review of the evidence in science. Well, the fact of the matter is people go to the emergency room when they've used Miffy and Mizo because they want to get confirmation that they're no longer pregnant and they don't have a regular doctor that they can go to. So they go to the emergency room to get a screening of some kind or, a test of some kind or a sonogram. So again, the adverse event report for Miffy and Mizo is at the 0.05 range, but the opposition funded by Leonard Leo through Project 2025, et cetera, will stop at nothing to try to create all of this pressure to put mifepristone back under lock and key. Now, because I obsess over what FDA is doing and how FDA interacts with HHS and all the rest of it, paid a lot of close attention over this past couple of weeks and talked to, I won't say friends in high places, but friends in places who know things. And even though Kennedy did make that statement in front of, I think it must have been Senate Health and Human Services, saying, yes, I've ordered McCary, who's the FDA commissioner, to conduct a review, and he'll tell me what he finds at the end of the day. And Kennedy says this, at the end of the day, it is going to be President Trump who decides what happens next. Now, asking FDA to conduct an expert scientific review and then saying it's up to the president about what to do as a result of that is bonkers, batshit bonkers, really scary. The reassuring news, or I can't swear to this, but the scuttlebutt, the information that I'm picking up is that sure, Kennedy probably said that on the record in that moment, but McCary has since also said on the record, and this time in front of, again, another group of senators, look, and I heard him speak for 30 minutes and he made this point literally 3 times. I am the author of more than 250 peer review articles, journals, scientific journals. This epic piece of shit is not peer review. And the data that they're using is not open to public scrutiny. So there's nothing for us to see here, us, the FDA. We can't look at it. It's not real. So we're not doing anything with it. I think, what he then turns around and says, which is reassuring in my opinion, is FDA's job is to look at all the science all the time. Of course, they're not looking at it all the time, but they are tracking things, again, through these adverse event reports, through what real scientists and epidemiologists, et cetera, submit. And so I have to believe that as a person who takes great pride in his peer review credentials, that he's going to recognize good science when he sees it and junk science when he sees it. But that junk science is being weaponized, not just by the opposition, but by Senator Josh Hawley, again, to try to put Miffy under lock and key. And Josh Hawley's connection to this is also through his wife, Erin Hawley. Erin Hawley was the chief lawyer at what was then, who brought the litigation a couple of years ago, year and a half ago, that you guys probably heard about, the Alliance for, they call themselves Hippocratic Medicine. I call them hypocritical medicine. Erin Hawley brought that litigation to FDA and said, FDA, you botched it. You should never have approved this drug in the first place. You got it all wrong. You have to take it off the market. That lot, and she brought it on behalf of a group of doctors who don't provide abortion care. She brought it in front of Judge Kazmierek in Amarillo, Texas, who is a federal judge who is known to have very strong anti-choice proclivities. So she knew she was going to get a favorable ruling there. She knew she was going to get a favorable ruling in the Fifth Circuit. Ultimately, the Supreme Court, this current Supreme Court, said, no, those scientists who don't practice this medicine don't have the grounds on which to bring this lawsuit. So we are dismissing this case based on standing. But obviously, Josh Hawley feels badly for his wife, or feels like the mission has to be continued. So he's now standing behind this junk science and using his role as a senator who sits on the HELP committee to try to pressure FDA and HHS, and at some point I'm sure he will focus on Trump to say you've got to put this medication back under lock and key. So that's what we're focused on right now, but there's other stuff happening or could happen, so we have to be, again, in forward stance mode, because this could come from a number of places.
So I'm hearing a circular thing here. We've got a junk science report by a Project 2025 group that Josh Hawley's picking up on and doing legislation, and RFK Jr. is using it as a basis to review a medication that's been effective and safe for 25 years. And going back to the FDA and I'm going to say the name of the case wrong, but the hypocritical that you called them. I know that case is over now, but number one, I think you told me that it's actually kind of been, the same issue's been refiled back in front of Judge Kazmierek, who they know is going to rule for them. But I would like to also, because I think a lot of people, what they're going to say is like, oh, well, when Trump came into office, that case was pending and they just didn't dismiss it. They stood up for the drug. And I just want to point out why they didn't actually stand up for the drug.
Yeah. So Supreme Court said, Alliance for Hypocritical Medicine, Alliance Defending Freedom, you don't have standing. You don't provide this medical care. So then 3 attorneys general from Kansas, Missouri, and Idaho, 2 states of which, by the way, have legalized abortion. The Missouri drama happening right now, playing out in real time, is a whole other thing. But like 2 of those states are on record as saying, we believe women should have access to abortion care. But those 3 attorneys general filed a new argument in front of Judge Kazmierek that essentially boils down to, hey, FDA removed the in-person distribution requirement in a pre-Dobbs world. We're now in a post-Dobbs world, and FDA is still allowing people in states with abortion bans, like our states, to have access to, or to be able to see healthcare providers in states where it is not banned, and then have the medication delivered to them. So FDA, that's wrong. That violates our state stuff. So FDA, you have to reinstate the in-person distribution requirement. And they have some other really kind of bonkers arguments in their lawsuit, including the fact that the fact that people are terminating pregnancies results in fewer births, which means a lower tax base for their state budgets. I'm not making that up. That is actually in the argument. So that argument was filed again in front of Judge Kazmierek, and then DOJ, which DOJ, which represents FDA. And through the AHM case, DOJ really stood in lockstep with FDA and the drug sponsors and said, FDA did its job. They evaluated all of this. These arguments are BS, et cetera. We were very concerned, worried, skeptical about what this DOJ would say in response to that kind of states' rights argument, especially given Trump's talking points about states' rights. But I guess at the beginning of this month, DOJ filed a brief in front of Kazmierek that essentially said, we don't think these plaintiffs, these 3 attorneys general, have standing either. the speculation about why they did that, because it was a good look, right? From our perspective, it was like, oh, look at that, the DOJ defending FDA. The DOJ didn't say anything about the merits of the argument. They didn't say anything about FDA's review or standard or anything like that. All they said was those three attorneys, why are Kansas, Missouri, and Idaho bringing a lawsuit in Texas? And you got to admit that's a legit question. And they probably made that argument because this DOJ is worried about what other blue states might do in terms of if there are awful federal laws, restrictions, et cetera. If blue states want to step up and say, hey, we're not going to abide by that federal regulation, we're going to do our own thing, right? Big giant can of worms. So that's probably what motivated them to make that argument. But the case is still in front of Kazmierek, and we're waiting to see what he does next.
Right. And I'm being cynical, but I also would presume they probably didn't want to go on record and actually have to talk about the safety of the medication because they would then be on the record defending its safety, and that's not really aligned with what they want to do. So that's
Yeah.
why I think it's very interesting that they picked standing and just saying these people don't have the right to sue.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm a lawyer too, so I'm getting in the weeds about all of this. So we're gonna move on to some other less Supreme Court legal topics, but what are some of the most pressing state level effects or tactics that are now being used to try to ban or like restrict access to the abortion pill? And also, someone had submitted a question and asked, like, can you name like the few keys, like, where's the states where this is really becoming an issue or where this is really being focused?
Yeah. So I don't track the state by state stuff as closely as many people do. But I can tell you, like, from a big picture perspective, the thing that caught our attention last year is, and I mentioned this and somebody else in the chat did it, brought this up as well, is the state of Louisiana decided to schedule mifepristone and misoprostol. And that means that those two medications are subject to really heightened scrutiny by anybody who's involved with the prescribing or dispensing of the medication. And it means that, like, in hospitals, again, we talked about the way misoprostol is used in urgent situations, in time-sensitive situations, to stop bleeding or, help a patient stop hemorrhaging, et cetera, that those medications are now held under lock and key, and people have to run and go get them literally and bring them into the room, or that pharmacies that are getting prescriptions for misoprostol for, being able to do a hysterectomy because that's, that they get to say, no, I'm not going to fill that prescription. It was really an out there argument, and details about why it was particularly out there. Lawmakers in Louisiana tried to push back, advocates tried to push back, but this is a legislature that, is 2/3 totally in the right to life pocket. And I'm, a little freaked out that Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, is very closely tied to the Louisiana legislature. And so we thought we'd see that coming up at a federal level. We haven't, and maybe as importantly, even though a few states wanted to replicate that law, Texas included, a couple of others, none have so far this state legislative season. We're at the end of May, so most state legislatures will wrap up next month. A few continue on throughout the year, but we haven't seen, with the exception of one bill in Kansas that I'm going to get wrong in terms of a description. I'll look it up on my screen when I get a chance. There really hasn't, a lot of the legislation was introduced, a lot of this bad stuff was introduced, but nothing else has made it through. And to us, that says, again, the or at least some of the Republicans recognize that trying to criminalize or criminalize people for providing information or providing, an FDA approved medication is a bad look. Especially when we're talking about a medication that's used at 10 weeks or less in pregnancy. And they don't necessarily want to go there. There will always be extreme politicians who are going to keep, doing this. See Josh Hawley. But there are others in the party who are saying, slow our roll. And of course, we think that's all also tied into what might be happening in 2026 in the midterm elections. So, we can pivot into that discussion a little bit more. But yeah, and I checked with our colleagues at the State Innovation Exchange, which does track state legislatures very closely. They also kind of left this session going, could have been worse, could have been a lot worse. Yeah, they'll
That's
be back. We know.
okay. Well, thank you for some good news that it could have
Yeah.
been. So that's a that's some hope there. Let's talk just for a minute about shield laws. And I just listened to a podcast about this. So some states have these shield laws that protect doctors who are providing abortion care. So how do those interact with the states and places that have these anti-abortion laws on the books? Is there a legal conflict there? Is there an attempt to try to like go after those doctors who are protected?
Yeah. So 8 states have so far passed, as you say, shield laws that protect a licensed healthcare provider in that state. Usually, you're only licensed to practice in a state in which you're licensed to practice. Excuse me. Usually, you can only see patients in a state in which you are licensed to practice. What these shield laws say is, if you are licensed to practice in our state, New York, California, or Washington, excuse me, and you want to provide care and services to patients in other states, i.e., patients in states where abortion is banned and there are no clinics left and there are no doctors prescribing mifepristone, we will not prosecute you for doing that. And more to the point, we are going to protect you if another state wants to come at you. And so you might have seen some news around this. There is a healthcare provider in New York State, Dr. Margaret Carpenter, who has been doing these telehealth visits and delivering medication to patients in states with bans. Only way people in those states can get abortion care. I mean, not the only way, but getting on a plane to fly somewhere that takes a lot out of you. So she's providing these medications, and in Texas and Louisiana, basically different circumstances, but the person getting the prescription was kind of outed by a family member, boyfriend, which how much of a friend is that? And then went to the law enforcement in those states and said, look, you've got to go after this doctor in New York State who's providing care to somebody in my state. And so Louisiana and Texas have actually submitted, and again, I don't even play a doctor on TV or want to, but they've tried to, say to New York State, this doctor Carpenter has to be extradited. Like, we have to prosecute her in our state, in Texas and Louisiana. And New York State is very clear. Nope, we're not going along with that. And actually, the Attorney General, I got to hear her speak not too long ago, and she was really proud of the fact that the subpoena came in through, a small upstate court, and not through New York City, where everybody might have known about this, but a small upstate court. And the person in charge, the bureaucrat, and I say that word with love, in charge of trying to process that paperwork, was like, oh yeah, no, we're not doing this. No, we're protecting this provider. So all that to say, the states that have enacted these shield laws are very clear about what they're doing. They're very clear about trying to protect their healthcare providers. But they're also very clear about, we don't know how this is all going to work out in the courts, because this is going to be a states' rights kind of thing. And, TBD. But in the meantime, the fact that these healthcare providers are out there, now 20% of abortions in bans. Sorry, I'm going to botch the statistics, so I won't say it. But this has been a really critical way for people in states with abortion bans to still be able to get the abortion care that they need.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about misinformation and misconceptions, because what role do you think, like, well, disinformation, misinformation, and misconceptions about the abortion pill, how do you think those all work together, and in terms of like rolling back access to this medication?
So, I mean, again, the opposition will embarrass themselves. I mean, there was one other thing that came out this week. I think it was the beginning of this week. Time is flat for me, but so the Charlotte Lozier Institute has been at kind of the forefront of efforts to undermine the public perception and confidence in the safety of mifepristone. Um, and Charlotte Lozer Institute actually did an article this week that trashed the EPPC study because they were like, they got it so wrong. So, the right is eating its own, which is great for us. But I guess that just, to me, an example of there's nothing for the opposition to stand on when it comes to the actual track record of safety and efficacy of these medications. It's just not there. No medication is 100% safe and effective. Every medication has side effects or unexpected outcomes. But when it comes to managing those unexpected outcomes, we know what to do. We know how to do it well. And the alternative, if people are not getting access to abortion care, they're having pregnancies that they don't want to continue because they've already got 3 kids, 2 of whom are special needs, and they can't really figure out a way to do 3 jobs and raise 3 kids at the same time. That is a legit thing that is happening to people in their lives. Or they've got some other health complication. They're like, my body is not going to be able to do this. I can't carry this pregnancy to term. I need to end this pregnancy. So I forget where I started, but safety and efficacy, we do, and I go a little overboard on my esteem for FDA, given the thing I did at Pew, but FDA really is recognized around the globe as setting the gold standard for scientific and evidence-based review. And so we can all sleep a little better at night knowing they've looked at this a lot over the years, and it works.
Okay, so how do these attacks on the abortion pill disproportionately affect marginalized communities? So that could be a rural community, that could be people of color, that could be people who maybe just have lower income, and less ability to access. How is all this like impacting them?
Yeah. So I mean, again, the what we know about medication abortion care and the fact that we can do this through telehealth, we don't have to make people come into a clinic. It fits better with people's busy lives of trying to take care of a really important moment and get the health care they need without having to disrupt everything. I will. I'm not laugh, that's not the right word, but we do a lot of opinion research and focus groups. And, we have talked with people, especially in rural communities like Nevada and Eastern Oregon and, voters in those places about, there aren't that many clinics and so on. And what I hear back is like, yeah, I have to drive 100 miles to get my groceries. So going 100 miles to get the pill, not a big deal. It's the people in suburban and urban areas that always get freaked out of like, what, you have to drive 3 hours? But anyway, again, it makes the whole access to care more streamlined, more convenient, for lack of a better word, and more reasonable. It is, if you're going into a clinic for a procedure, that's going to cost you several $100s. And if you are a person struggling to make ends meet, that is going to mean you're deciding what's the bill I'm not paying this month in order to pay this unexpected healthcare cost. If you're using the telehealth models, and there are a variety of groups that are doing this, you are more likely to have, your whole all in is going to be more closer to 100, 150, and a number of those virtual healthcare providers can underwrite the cost of the appointment, or they can't underwrite the cost of delivery of the medication. They're usually, there's something you have to cover, but you can imagine how it goes a long way to making people feel like, okay, I've got this big thing that I have to manage while I'm managing, my family. I can do this. I can do
Yep.
this.
All right, so tell us about your campaign, Miffy and 50, and how your organization, Emma Project, is working to ensure that evidence-based FDA approved medication remains accessible. Sorry, that FDA approved abortion medication remains accessible to everybody. And I'm going to drop the link in the chat to it right now.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah. So by the way, sorry, the link in the chat came through as life in 50. It's
Yeah,
Miffy.
I'm gonna fix it. I just
Sorry.
saw, I literally
Whoops,
looked
way
at it and I was
ahead.
like, I'm gonna blame
Um,
autocorrect for that. I'm gonna blame
I
autocorrect.
will. You are
Okay,
correct. You are correct on autocorrect. So
there we go.
yeah, essentially, I mean, and I talked about this a few beats ago, but there isn't a review, even though Kennedy says there's a review, there isn't a review, or there's not one that we can see. I don't think McCary is going to initiate anything based on what Epic has submitted so far. So we want to keep the attention, the pressure on Trump, because again, Kennedy said Trump is going to decide this. We want to keep the bat signals going into Trump's feral brain, not to allow the opposition to play games with this medication or to put it back under lock and key. Again, even though you left it, you, Trump, said you were going to leave abortion up to states, people in those states believe they should have access to an FDA approved medication, even if especially when that medication is used at 10 weeks or less in pregnancy. Like, that's just a very common sense thing. So that's what we're trying to do with MIFI in all 50, is we're asking you to just take a minute, go to that website, sign the pledge, and that sends a message into the White House. And just, we want to keep the drumbeat going there so that the political decision makers really understand this is not in our best interest. Pursuing what it is that Josh Hawley is asking us to do is not going to work for us. The status quo is, there's a lot of work we need to be doing to make abortion more accessible, in my opinion, but ensuring that mifepristone is in fact remaining available to people in all 50 states through this telehealth model is absolutely vital. So that's what we're asking people to do. We'll change up the calls to action as, again, we see if it's a new litigation fight or a new legislation or bill that's introduced or a new whatever executive order that's coming down. We'll adapt that call to action as appropriate. But right now, we're just really trying to build a drumbeat with the White House itself so that they know, yeah, pass.
Okay, so that's great, because I was going to ask you about what to do. So everyone check out the Miffy and 50 campaign. And I'm going to have one more question for you. Then I'm also going to say something that Red, Wine, and Blue is pushing for people to do to take action. And then we'll get to your guys' questions from the chat. So you've been doing this, well, focusing on this now very intently. So what gives you hope, even in the face of all of these coordinated efforts to restrict access to the abortion pill?
Well, I mean, this moment here with all of you and, seeing the responses in the chat right now, like, and that, we can organize, we can do this, we can push back the lawmakers. We can't let them, put the bans in our mailboxes, put the bans on our medicine cabinets, put the bans on our doctor's visits. We have to stand up and fight. And so there's just that, and that gets my juices flowing because, I'm here with you and you want to do this fight. But also, again, at the end of the day, I just really believe this is such common sense. It's not the fight that this administration should want to opt in for. There are other things. Anyway, I won't go that because I don't want to trade off other things. It's all horrible. But generally speaking, again, we're talking about a medication that is used at 10 weeks or less to end a pregnancy or help a person manage a miscarriage. How can you deny people access to that?
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to have Julie come up to start answering your all questions. We have just launched our new campaign, which is We Decide, Not Politicians. And this is to focus on any kind of reproductive freedom. So that could be abortion, that could be saving IVF and birth control, which, by the way, we're also going after.
Yep, that's right.
So I'm going to drop this right here. Check this out. This is our, well, I'm going to show you the website at the end here, but we have this campaign and you can share it with friends. We have ready-made social media posts to talk to you, put it on socials so your friends can come check it out. We need to make sure one of the ways we defeat this is we talk about it and we spread the word so that people are aware, because there's a lot of stuff going on and people are tuning out. So we need to do that. So I'm dropping that link. I'll keep dropping it, and then we will touch base on it at the end as well. But I'm going to let Julie take it away with your, I'm sure, amazing questions from the chat.
So the 10 weeks, is that after your last period, or is that 10 weeks gestation? That's been asked a couple times.
Sorry, 10 weeks after your last menstrual period.
Okay. All right. And then is it better to focus on federal or state legislators?
I would say for the next 6 months, again, because most of the state legislatures have wrapped up. And again, I'm not getting any six was not saying there's this bill in Texas, Texas is also wrapping up. There's this bill in another state that we have to stop. Um, so I would say federal at the moment.
Someone was asking if anyone in Congress drafted legislation using the Comstock Act to prevent mailing of the abortion pill.
Yes. Oh, Comstock. I'm so glad you brought him up. All right. For those who don't know, Anthony Comstock was the director for the suppression of vice and sin in New York City in the 1860s, going into the 1870s. And he ended up enacting legislation that said that it was criminal to send anything pornographic. He was very much against pornographic, and he included anything related to contraception and abortion through the U.S. Postal Service. That law has been very episodically enforced, but in the 1960s, Congress updated that law to make clear that it did not apply to contraceptive methods or information. Right now, there is, as part of Project 2025, the opposition is saying, hey, Trump, DOJ, US Postal Service, go ahead and enforce Comstock so that the medications cannot be mailed. There's a lot of legal theory about, does the legislation really just apply to information? Does it apply to FDA approved medications? TBD. But again, this goes back to my theory of the whatever universe is like, there are people who will, on this extreme edge of the anti-abortion movement, who will wrap themselves in anything, including a law from 1873. But most other people, Republicans are going to be like, I don't really want to stand with a law from 1873 to do this. So yes, but that was an incomplete answer. Yes, we are monitoring, potential legislative weaponization of Comstock. And so that might be a future ask at some point.
Someone asked, can ED meds be changed to force men to have to see a doctor to get them?
We don't want to play tit for tat. We don't want to, but yes, that is a good rhetorical question to ask whenever you are talking with your friends and family about what this means.
Someone asked, why is the AMA silent?
The American Medical Association, they are not silent. They just don't prioritize advocacy on this. But they did weigh in on the Alliance for Hypocritical Medicine litigation. They did file an amicus brief in that case saying, like, whoa, FDA has done its job. The medical community peer review evidence is very clear. The doctors should be in charge of this, not the politicians. So they're there. They're doing a lot of stuff right now and probably focused on vaccine availability.
Is there an attack on Plan B as well?
Not that I know of. Actually, there is. Okay, so one thing I will put a pin in here, and thank you. So Plan B, just to repeat, Plan B is used immediately after sex to prevent the pregnancy. Mifepristone is used after a pregnancy is established to end a pregnancy or manage a miscarriage. So Plan B, different drug, et cetera, they aren't coming at it directly. I'm sure somebody somewhere has said, oh, this has to be put back under lock and key. It shouldn't be available over the counter. But there is a little bit of noise, and I should have mentioned this under the misinformation question. There's a group called Students for Life that is spouting a lot of, again, BS about how mifepristone in particular is contaminating the drinking water. And so again, FDA should never have approved it and allowed it onto the market. And there are some, questions that are coming up in the MAHA space about, what's in the drinking water and how well are we doing. And so birth control, which is used, a lot more widely, but a lot more people all of the time, could come under that, and Plan B could come under that too. Speaking on behalf of Emma, we stand with the environmental health community of like, yeah, we need to be doing more to monitor our drinking water, but singling out, this one medication that's used, taken once, is not the problem. So move on.
So I think you actually addressed what this does for states that have abortion rights in their constitution. I think you addressed that a little bit. Did you not?
I'm sorry, you cut in a little bit in and
Oh,
out on that.
sorry. I think that you addressed what does this do for states that have abortion rights in their constitution?
Oh, for states that have abortion rights in their constitution, those are, more likely to be the states that have already leaned into the shield law stuff. And, just looking at those are, I can speak from personal experience, governors and attorneys general, and, directors of health departments in the state, really trying to make sure they're doing everything they can to ensure that as many healthcare professionals can prescribe the medication, that pharmacies are dispensing the medication, et
Mhm.
cetera. So,
So somebody asked, as a 70-year-old woman, can I go to the drugstore and buy a bunch of this medicine?
no, no, you would have to get a prescription for it. And, again, you'd have to answer questions about when your last menstrual period is. And I'm guessing as a 70-year-old woman, you would have to put down a decade or two. So my guess is you would not get a prescription for Miffy. I will acknowledge, the two sites that I direct people to, if you know of somebody who, if you yourself or somebody who's looking for abortion medication, the two sites that I recommend people go to is I Need an A and then Abortion Finder. And those sites will direct you to, again, the certified prescribers, and the telehealth and Shield state providers who will give you FDA approved medication and all the things. If you type in abortion pill on the web, you can get ads for other places and other companies, and some of which, don't have a lot of oversight or scrutiny. But then some people are using that to get advanced provision of the pills, or they're going to their own doctor to get advanced provision of the pills. So, but yeah, going into a pharmacy and getting it, no.
So someone was not understanding what it is exactly that you want folks to do to, like educate the legislative or executive branch. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So at this point, really, we're just keeping it very simple. Tell Trump not to fall for the anti-choice BS opposition around mifepristone and put it back under lock and key. Just don't do that. Don't go there. Keep the current status quo. So that's it. But we'll again, as I said, we'll tweak that as events unfold.
So how do you keep a state like Florida that has a 6-week ban um, from banning Miffy after 6 weeks? And how does that, what about the states, I guess, with fetal personhood bills?
Yeah. So fetal personhood is actually, sorry, that was the bill in Kansas that I was trying to remember. That did actually move, but no other fetal personhood bills that were introduced. And I think there were 20, upwards of 20 this session have gone forward. So yeah, in Florida, if abortion is banned at 6 weeks, there are no healthcare providers who can prescribe mifepristone in that state. So the residents of Florida now have to go on to I Need an A or Abortion Finder and get connected to a healthcare provider in a state where it's legal, and then have it mailed to them. So
Well, and I just want to reiterate, you said that these bills have, I mean, these pills are used um, if there's an incomplete abortion and all that. So in these states where, like Florida, where that's happening, what are they doing? Are women just, I mean, I know we have seen several women who have passed away. Are they just letting women die in droves or, having to have unnecessary hysterectomies because they are just really not giving them the care they need?
yeah, I mean they are. So what if you're not offered mifepristone and misoprostol to help manage an early miscarriage, then you're getting misoprostol alone, or you're going into an emergency room for a procedure. Both of those again work. They're just not comfortable, or really, and people will say, I've heard this from both doctors and patients, that if you're going to into an emergency room needing an evacuation procedure, something that's going to clean out your uterus, you are not considered urgent in terms of some of the other patients who are in that room. So you can end up waiting hours in the emergency room in real discomfort, serious discomfort, until you get seen for that procedure. So yes, I mean, like, preserving, my short-term focus blinders on is preserving access to Miffy in all 50. But there is still so much work we have to do to ensure every patient gets access to the healthcare that they need on the
Well,
terms that work for them.
yeah, I just know that, African American women have, this infant mortality rate that's ridiculous considering
Yep.
where we are, or
Yes.
supposed to be. So I just, it just concerns me that, this is really going to disproportionately harm women of color.
You are right about that. And it's no coincidence that after some of the news broke last year about, a woman from from Georgia drove to North Carolina to get Miffy pills, came back and she was experiencing bleeding, and the hospital wouldn't treat her and she died. And that has happened, and it will continue to happen. And as a result, the lawmakers in those states are shutting down the maternal mortality review boards. They're just going to pretend we don't see the evidence of what's happening.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's bad.
So somebody says, how about birth control over the counter? Where does that stand state by state?
Oh, so birth control is available over the counter, or at least one method of birth control pills. The O pill is now available over the counter. I think it's been a little more than a year. First FDA approved medication for birth control over the counter.
That's interesting. I'm assuming that if it's over the counter, then it's no longer covered by insurance.
So that, yes, you are correct. And also the advocates who push to make this happen have been really trying to get that covered by insurance. And there's some stuff in the Affordable Care Act that creates some mechanisms, workaround. But of course, the Republican lawmakers on the Hill are trying to shut all that down and take all of that back. So, yeah.
Well, let's see. Okay, so how can feds even try to control abortion when they passed the right to states after the end of Roe versus Wade?
Yeah, I mean, that's really the argument that we're going to see play out in court, this states' rights thing. FDA has preemptive authority over what states can and can't do in terms of making FDA-approved medication available. And in fact, Emma is sponsoring litigation in North Carolina because in that state, lawmakers reverted back to the early restrictions that I talked about. Only a doctor, an obstetrician, gynecologist can write a prescription for mifepristone. Patient has to come into the clinic and take mifepristone in the clinic. Patient has to come back for a follow-up visit. So those are things that FDA affirmatively looked at and said are more of a burden than a benefit. But North Carolina legislature didn't care about that. They were like, yeah, we just need to block people's access to this. So we brought litigation on behalf of Amy Bryant, an obstetrician gynecologist in North Carolina, sponsored or went in as the plaintiff on this. We were originally suing Josh Stein, who was the attorney general at the time. He's now governor of North Carolina. He actually joined our side of the litigation and said, I agree with the plaintiffs. 18 other states attorneys general also joined our argument and said, we agree with the plaintiff. The case right now is up on appeal in the Fourth Circuit. Oral arguments were held at the end of last year, and we're waiting to see, or beginning of this year. Again, time flat, and we're waiting to see what happens next. But this whole thing about preemption in states, it's unfolding in real time.
Well, I see that we're at time, and I know Julie wanted to come back in and show website. But thank you. This has been so informative. Very,
Thank
very
you.
helpful. Been a very lively chat in the
Yeah,
chat.
great questions. Great questions.
Mhm.
Good job, Julie, keeping up on that because I know you were reading the ones that were coming in at the end there. So, all right. So this is the new campaign for Red, White, and Blue. So come on here. It's We Decide, not politicians. We'd love for you to go through here. It'll talk about IVF. It'll talk about birth control. It'll talk about abortion. We have our wonderful interview. If you never heard Sally Field tell her abortion story, which she did on a Red, White, and Blue event, please check that out. You can get information on all those different issues. You can get statistics. Just answers all of your questions. So there's so much great information on here. But if you go all the way to the bottom of the page, you can see what I've been dropping in the chat is our link to our social media posts. You can come right on here. You can figure out which one you like the best that you want to share. You can make a decision about like which there's the instructions on how to do it, and then it gives you the opportunity to share on Facebook, or you can share on another social media platform. It's really easy. This is important that we spread the word to our friends and family because there is so much misinformation out there. So anyways, we know this was super informative and everybody learned a lot tonight, so please keep spreading that word. Okay, thank you so much to Kirsten for being here tonight and sharing all of this information with us. And we will hopefully see you soon at another event. Good night,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody. Good night.